Hi, I'm Carter Wilson, best-selling author and writing coach, and welcome to Meditations for Writers. Today I want to talk about a question that I would guess every writer asks at some point. Maybe you've asked it after yet another rejection. Maybe you've asked it after months of staring at a manuscript that honestly no longer excites you. Maybe you've asked it while scrolling through social media, watching everyone else announce book deals and bestseller lists. Or it could be you've asked it because AI can now produce thousands of words in seconds, and you're wondering whether the world even needs another writer. I mean, honestly, the question is simple. Why bother? Why spend hundreds of hours writing a novel that may never be published? Why fight for something that seems to become more difficult every year? Why create at all? They're honest questions, and God knows I've asked them myself. But I've also come to believe they're the wrong questions. Because those questions assume that the value of writing exists somewhere outside of you. Whether that's in publication or before the eyes of readers or in reviews or in any kind of external recognition. So today I'd like to explore another possibility. What if writing has already given you something long before anyone else reads a single page? What if the greatest gift of writing isn't the book you produce? It's the person you become while writing it. So if you're ready, close your eyes. Take a long, slow breath. And let's begin. Take another deep breath and just be aware of the surface supporting you, whether that's a chair or maybe it's your bed. And just allow your limbs to soften. And for this brief period of time, there's just nowhere else you need to be. No chapter waiting to be finished. No email waiting to be answered. Just this moment. And just your breath. So let's begin with the big question. Why bother? And notice what happens when you ask it. I bet your mind immediately begins looking for evidence, reasons, or proof. Maybe your mind tells you that writing only matters if someone else reads it. Or that success is the only thing that makes the years worthwhile. And it could be it's whispering that you've already spent too much time chasing something uncertain. Just notice those thoughts. I don't want you to argue with them or push them away. just recognize them for what they are. They're just thoughts. They're not truths. So take another long, deep breath. And then ask yourself a different question. Not, why should I write, but why do I write? Feel the difference. Because one of those questions is asking for permission, and the other just simply asks for honesty. Whenever I sit down with a new student that I'm coaching on writing, I always like to ask them first, why do you write? And I don't let them off the hook with an easy answer. I really make them explore it. Really make them look at the history of storytelling, because long before there were publishers, before there were bookstores or bestseller lists, people still told stories around campfires, around dinner tables. They told stories to their children before bed, or to strangers traveling the same road. And the thing is, stories weren't created because there was a market for them. Stories existed because human beings were simply trying to understand what it meant to be alive. Because a story could help explain loss, or courage, or love. It reminded people they weren't alone. And the beauty is that instinct hasn't disappeared. Publishing is only a few hundred years old. Storytelling is tens of thousands of years old. Which means your desire to write isn't something the publishing industry invented. No. It's deeply, deeply human. It's ancient. It's something that existed long before anyone thought to print a book. Now continue to relax and take another deep breath. And notice how that perspective changes the question. Because you're not participating in an industry. You're participating in one of humanity's oldest traditions. One of the greatest misunderstandings about writing is that the manuscript is the product. But it isn't. You're the product. Every story changes the writer before it ever changes the reader. Writing teaches patience. And it's not because someone tells you to be patient, it's because stories refuse to arrive on your schedule. Writing teaches humility. Because every first draft reminds you how much there still is to learn. And it really teaches observation, doesn't it? You begin noticing conversations differently. Expressions, silences, those small moments that most people overlook. And what I love is that writing, almost more than anything else, teaches empathy. You spent hours trying to understand people who don't exist. And then, almost without realizing it, you become better at understanding the people who do. Writing teaches resilience. And not because resilience sounds inspiring, but because if you're being honest with yourself, you have no choice, because you will write scenes that fail. Characters who refuse to cooperate, and books that don't sell. You might get halfway through a book and then realize your idea is just going to collapse. And yet you return again and again. And those aren't just writing skills. Those are life skills. And they stay with you whether your manuscript ever reaches a bookstore or not. So let's talk about AI. And I don't want to approach this subject with fear, but with perspective. AI can arrange words, sometimes beautifully. It can imitate style, it can recognize patterns, it can predict what sentence is likely to come next. But if you step back and look at it, you realize that's never been what made writing meaningful. Because writing isn't simply language or just words placed in some kind of order. Writing is attention. It's noticing something about life that no one else quite noticed in the same way. It's taking all of your years of memories, of regrets and questions and relationships, moments of joy, moments of grief, and allowing them to shape the way you see the world. AI hasn't lived your life. It doesn't remember being 12 years old. It doesn't remember your first heartbreak or that distinct smell of a hospital room, the silence after an argument, or the feeling of standing outside on the first warm day of spring after a harsh winter. AI doesn't know what it means to become older, to lose someone, to forgive someone, or to wonder whether you've made the right decision. Your experiences aren't decorations you sprinkle into a story. They are the story. And every sentence you write carries traces of a life that only you have lived. And no matter how good AI gets, that is something no technology can replace. Because no technology has ever been you. When I started writing my very first novel, I didn't know what I was doing, and I had no idea whether it would ever be published. I just wanted to see if I could write it. I wasn't confident. I wasn't certain. I had no idea about the publishing industry. None of that was on my horizon. None of that was important. Because when I'm in the middle of a book, I just keep showing up. And eventually I found an agent. And that felt like a really big milestone to me. I thought in some way that meant I'd arrived. But then my first 3 books didn't sell. It would have been easy to believe those years had been wasted. Easy to decide that, I'd spent thousands of hours chasing something that just simply wasn't going to happen. But along the way, the important thing happened. I became a better writer. And certainly rejection wasn't easy, and it never became something I could get used to. But I could look at the rejection as telling me that I wasn't ready yet. Rejection was asking me, what can I learn from this? What can I improve? What haven't I figured out yet? And those unsold books weren't failures. They weren't wasted time. They were my education. And without those 3 books that never saw the light of day, readers would never have discovered the books that eventually did get published. So imagine that no one ever read another word you wrote. That means no publishers, no readers, no reviews, no awards. Would writing still matter to you? I mean, really think about this, and I don't want you to rush to answer that question. Just kind of sit with it for a second. Because if the answer is yes, a yes that you feel in your bones, then I think you've discovered something kind of extraordinary. You've discovered that writing belongs to you. Not to the market, not to the publishing industry or to social media. It primarily belongs to the part of yourself that kind of wants to understand your own life through storytelling. And I think once you realize that, everything else becomes a bonus. Publication becomes wonderful, but not necessary. Readers become a gift, but not a requirement. Because the act itself of storytelling has already given you something. And writing slows us down, in this world that just seems to reward speed and constant motion. Writing asks us to notice, to observe, to remain curious, and to be fully present in the moment. When I sit down to write every day, to me it's meditation. And it's probably the only time of the day where I am just fully focused only on the present moment. I feel like the normal world outside of writing is constantly asking us to react to things. And what writing does is it asks us to reflect. The world tells us to move faster, but writing asks us to stop and pay some closer attention to what's happening. And sometimes I feel like that's one of the reasons writing actually matters now more than ever. Because I think the world needs more people willing to stop and pay attention. So the next time you find yourself frustrated and you're asking yourself, why bother? Ask yourself instead, who am I becoming by writing this? Because after more than 20 years of doing this, I can tell you every page changes you in some way, and every story expands you. Every revision certainly teaches you humility. And every time you get to the end, whether it's a novel or a short story, it teaches you you're capable of finishing hard things. And I promise you, those gifts don't disappear because a manuscript doesn't sell. They become a part of you. Something that no rejection letter can take away, no changing industry can take away, and certainly no artificial intelligence can take away. So take one final deep breath. And remember this: you're not writing because the world needs another book. You're writing because creating is one of the deepest ways a human being participates in life. Stories help us make sense of joy, of fear, grief, hope, love. So don't write because you're trying to outrun AI or you're trying to beat the publishing industry. Write because curiosity deserves your attention, and because stories are how you make sense of your life. And maybe somewhere along the way, they'll help someone else make sense of theirs. So feel gratitude for the stories you've already written, published or not. Because every one of them helped create the writer sitting here today. And when you're ready, I want you to come back to the room. Open your eyes. And now maybe it's time to return to the page. Not because you have something to prove, but because you have something to discover.